don't think retaliation is at the top of their list right now. They've already done a lot, which has had more of a political impact in the United States than economic in terms of what's happened to farmers. And I think they're just going to wait it out because I think they believe, and I believe, and I think Larry Kudlow seems to believe, listening to the quote that you just played, that President Trump understands that a deal is better for his reelection prospects than no deal because of the impact on American consumers and farmers and also on market sentiment, as you've been talking about. So I think they're looking to get President Trump to agree to things that are not too disadvantageous to China so they can reach a deal later this year.
Do you think that they really will give in on some of the things that the president seems insistent upon to make the deal, as Larry said, good for America?
Well, I think as long as it's good for both sides, which is pretty much the fundamental nature of a trade negotiation between two countries, then yes, I think the Chinese want to do a deal. If the U.S. is asking for reasonable things, for example, better market access for American companies, China understands that since they joined the WTO, better market access for foreign companies has been good for the Chinese economy and strengthened their own companies. Better protection for intellectual property rights for American companies is actually really good for Chinese companies now that the services and consumer part of the company and the tech part of the economy is bigger. So as long as the requests by the U.S. side are reasonable, yeah, I think China does still want to do a deal.
Jake, a lot of people are talking about how we're headed to a world that's more balkanized than the one we've experienced for the last 15 or 20 years. If that's true, I mean, are groups like the U.S.-China Business Council facing an existential threat?
Not at all. I think in the current state of the U.S.-China bilateral trade relationship today, groups like the U.S.-China Business Council are as important as ever. Many of our member companies are reluctant to stand up and talk about the challenges that the tariffs present for their operations, both in China and the United States. So they expect groups like ours to stand up and talk about the challenges that tariffs bring about for their operations and the harm that they cause to the U.S. economy and to U.S. business and to U.S. consumers and farmers.
So in other words, there's a lot of individual companies that don't really want to have to put their names and reputations in the middle of this, right? So give us a sense for what they're telling you. I mean, how bad are things looking for them?
So when we talk to our member companies on the ground in China, they indicate that the Chinese government has actually taken a proactive stance of reaching out to see what their challenges are in the local market. They want to resolve their issues because there's a big concern in China today that U.S. companies may consider shifting their supply chains to Southeast Asia or Mexico or Eastern Europe, and the Chinese government is responding to that. So I agree with what Andy said earlier. The Chinese government is going to be very, very reluctant to respond by negatively impacting U.S. industry in the market. I think it's much more likely that China will continue to open and reform, and unfortunately U.S. companies will miss out on that because of the retaliatory tariffs that China has imposed on the United States.